I think it's impossible to know what it's like to be a research subject unless you hear it from their mouths. I mean, I think a researcher who does research might think that she or he knows what it's like to be on the other side of the stethoscope or needle or bone marrow biopsy instrument or, you know, drug dose. But I believe very strongly in the, you know, walk a mile in someone's moccasins. And I also believe very profoundly and will always believe that you can't talk about us without us. If you're talking about an affected group, if we're talking about how to make sure research subjects are treated ethically, why wouldn't we ask them? Why wouldn't we have them tell us what feels good about participating in research and what feels disrespected about participating in research or disrespectful? Why don't we have them tell us what they wish if they were king or lord of the manor or, you know, head of NIH or FDA? So to me, it just makes sense. But I know that there have been several things along the way that have really reinforced that very powerfully, because we'll have a conference and someone will talk about research subjects and make assumptions that are later contradicted by the subjects themselves. And everyone can discount that. Well, it's that subject's perspective. But when you hear it enough, you start to understand. And again, this is something that in medicine in general has been borne out. Ken Schwartz was a lawyer in Boston who died of lung cancer about 15 years ago. And he wrote an extraordinary piece in the Boston Globe about how the caregivers that really mattered to him were the nurses who stopped to touch him or say a kind word or listen to him or just sit with him. Whereas the doctors, all of whom were at a very eminent hospital in Boston and obviously very accomplished, skilled people, you know, did not think of him as anything other than a sick and ultimately a dying man, and really did nothing to care for his soul as well as his body, and how that was so painful to him, because ultimately the caring of the nurses and other auxiliary professionals was what made his disease and ultimately the end of his life bearable. So when you hear about it from the affected person's perspective, I feel you are morally obligated to listen and to interweave their impressions and their requests into your practice. I know that although now the word retarded is thankfully considered, as well it should be, a horrible thing to say to anyone. When I was growing up, and even when my children were young, it was a word that was thrown around a lot. And I used to lead a curriculum in my children's school called Understanding Disabilities. And we would show films about disabilities, and we would bring in people with, it was an 8-week curriculum, and we'd bring in, it was 4th grade, we'd bring in people with different disabilities. And we'd bring in some people who were developmentally disabled. And one of these 4th graders said to one of these groups, there were 4 individuals who were developmentally disabled, "How does it make you feel if people call you retarded?" And one of the men said, "It makes me so sad I want to cry. I know that's a bad word, and it makes me feel like someone doesn't know who I am." And then the woman said, "You know, I hate that." I mean, they were all so adamant about it, and they were all very gentle, kind people. So, you know, again, that just reminded me that, you know, some people may say, well, it's just a word and it just means slow, but everyone understands it has a symbolic meaning as well as maybe a literal one. And again, it happens over and over when we've had research subjects. We had a young woman who I believe was 20 from South Africa who had HIV, and she had written a letter to her caregivers that she read at our conference, and it said, "I respect you, but I wonder if you respect me." And so to hear that, you can't, you know, if I were a researcher, or if I was someone who was educating researchers, I don't think I could ever have a researcher-subject interaction without thinking about her and really trying harder to be more sensitive to subjects and their needs. So, Jesse Gelsinger was an 18-year-old man who lived in the Philadelphia area, who suffered from a metabolic disorder that was controlled through diet. And in '98, he started going to the University of Pennsylvania because this was the age of exploding genetics, and there was some notion that there could be these gene replacement therapies, gene therapies where they could remove or otherwise inactivate the defective gene and replace it with a functional gene, and that these genetic disorders would then disappear. So there was a researcher at Penn named Jim Wilson, who had been doing research on this particular metabolic disorder. He had done research on animals and had done it with some newborns. And he was ready to start enrolling human subjects. And he also had started and was part of a biotech company that was standing ready to patent and license this gene therapy and this technology once it had been demonstrated to be effective. And he was one of the principals, so that if this research succeeded, he would stand to profit handsomely and have a financial stake in the research outcome. So Jesse Gelsinger and his dad, Paul, and his mom went to see Jim Wilson, and he said to Jesse that if you have this gene replacement therapy, you won't need to, and again, excuse me, this is a paraphrase and probably a poor one, but this has been written about. This gene therapy will preclude your having to worry about diet anymore. And for an 18-year-old young man, having to watch what you eat and having to be so rigid and controlled about diet, and to feel that you're the only one in your group of friends who does have to be so mindful, was difficult. But he was doing it, and he was healthy, and he was strong. But he agreed to go in this research protocol and to have this gene therapy. He never was told that Jim Wilson stood to profit were this research to succeed. He was never told that the animal research that Jim Wilson had done, or that others had done, I think it was others who had done the animal research, had proven that there was a problem with this gene therapy. Nor had he been told that there had been some severe adverse reactions in the babies who had been given this therapy. And finally, there were some of his tests, his chemistries, that would have suggested that suggested that he was not an appropriate candidate for this research. And again, I don't remember whether it was liver or kidney, but one of his tests was abnormal enough that he should not have been enrolled in this protocol because he did not meet the inclusion criteria. So Jesse went into the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, was given the gene therapy, and went into massive organ shutdown within 24 hours, I believe, and was dead in 3 days. And again, this was an 18-year-old who was not suffering, had a metabolic condition that was controlled without any side effects except inhibited food requirements, inhibited by type of food, not quantity. And that created an outcry because it was this perfect storm of a conflicted investigator, a research subject who should never have been approached because of the animal and newborn data, a research subject who should never have been approached because he himself did not meet the inclusion criteria, and a researcher who in general had so overstated the benefits or potential benefits of the research based on this animal and human data that it was unethical on its face. And so Paul Gelsinger, Jesse's dad, came to the PRIM&R conference and gave a talk that I don't think there were many dry eyes in the room. I don't know specifically, but people who were in the back of the room, I was in the front row, said that there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and the people who weren't crying had lumps in their throat. It was so powerful because his son died because there was an unethical researcher and an ambitious researcher and an aggressive researcher and a researcher who really thought more about his own profit and promotion in the figurative sense than Jesse Gelsinger. So that had a tremendous impact on me and on the field. Every time something like that happens, again, Nicole Wan, Ellen Roche, Jesse Gelsinger, we're reminded that the past is always prologue. That sadly, human nature is such that there will always be people who choose self-aggrandizement over subject protection, and that part of PRIM&R's goal certainly is to educate people so they can be gatekeepers and educated and empowered ones, but that we have to really keep tending that flame of protecting subjects, because it's nothing that it's ongoing work. It's work you'll never finish, and it just reminded me that we have to be even more zealous in our efforts than before, because you can get lulled into this sense of, oh well, you know, there haven't been very bad things happening for a while, so everyone must be getting the memos, and in fact they're not. And the sad thing about research with human subjects is that quite often when research subjects die or experience a very severe side effect or suffer a severe harm, people will say, oh, that's from their underlying illness, or that was from the pre-existing problem. It wasn't the research, but in truth, quite often it's unknowable what the ultimate precipitant was that caused the death. And so many people feel that not only are adverse events of research underreported, but that research-related deaths are underreported, because quite often the institution is so terrified of reporting it as a research-related death, and sometimes it's legitimate that no one does know, because these are complex illnesses and complex problems. So, as NIH funding began shrinking in the 90s, and certainly throughout this past decade, in the early 2000s until the present, as the research funding began shrinking, pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, device companies started to fill the void. And since they were not bound by the same rules and regulations as federally funded research sites, they quite often chose to do their trials in developing countries, partly because subjects are much more abundant, partly because the rules are much less abundant, there are far fewer rules, and partly because there are a lot of diseases in other countries that are in fact in need of studying and hopefully developing therapeutics for. So as the research started to move offshore, we decided that it's really important that our vigilance or our educational efforts include that offshore research, because in fact it's quite clear that people in developing resource-scarce countries are very vulnerable. They don't have health insurance, they don't have health care, they don't have money, they don't have medicine, they have very little in most cases. And so there is a very long and ignominious history of research in the developing world where companies would dump drugs that were no longer approved in our country and, sell them on the black market, or arrange for some middle people to try to distribute them on the black market. There are many stories. And I know the Constant Gardener is just one of the stories that alluded to some of the problems that has made it to the public screen, to the movie screen. But there are stories for the past 50 years about dumping drugs, about illegal, unethical research, just a lot of abuses. Clearly, the Guatemala study that came to light only 6 or 7 years ago was one such example, but there are many. So PRIM&R felt that if the research was going to involve subjects from these places, we needed to try to educate the IRBs, or in those countries they go by many different names, including research ethics committees, research ethics boards, and to do what we could to let the researchers know who are doing research there that, number one, ethics are ethics, no matter where you're doing the studies. Number two, if they come from institutions over here, those institutions are still going to be accountable, even if the subjects are in Asia or Africa or South or Central America. And also because we feel really strongly that vulnerability transcends culture and geography. You know, you could be culturally vulnerable as a member of a Native American tribe here or as a member of a specific group in Africa or Asia. But the problems that we had concentrated on since those early conferences were as generalizable to resource scarce countries as to our own backyard. We've worked with NIH, with the Fogarty Institute, which does a lot of very important training of people from other countries that are running research institutes. Again, they go by many different names, but programs in other countries. We've worked with Fogarty. We've done some work with the WHO, with the World Health Organization, and very fortunately, Alex Capron, our board chair, was in Geneva and had worked there for 3 years. Nancy Cass, one of our strong collaborators, was there for 1 year. We've also been very fortunate to have strong partners in South Africa and other countries who have come to our meetings and then taken back what they've learned and tried to share it with those who aren't able to make the trip. We have an active scholarship program where we have people apply from international settings to come, and if they are chosen, they are given, you know, airfare, lodging, and certainly free admission to our conferences, to the pre-conference program of their choice. We try to take them to an institution in the city in which the conference is being held so they can be shown around, perhaps sit in on a meeting, be mentored, or at least have question answered. We do whatever we can to bring people over, even if we can't give them the full travel and lodging package. We give many scholarships to attend the meetings. We just feel very strongly that what goes on in Africa and Asia is reminiscent of the US 50 years ago, where these committees were just getting started and no one quite knows what to do. It's still a very evolving situation with the research ethics committees, and they are very isolated and really, I think, have appreciated the guidance. I think that we learn so much whenever we talk to people with a different perspective, and because of our scholarship program, we do talk to and hear from many international people, both from the podium and in the smaller breakout sessions. I think that everyone who hears them really understands that, you know, this is not a monolithic problem. Every country, every culture has differences. You know, there are different parts of India that have entirely different approaches. Certainly that's the case in Africa as well. So, number one, it reminds us that there are certain universal principles that have to be adhered to wherever the research is conducted. Foremost among them, respecting the research subject. I mean, it really is so elemental and so often repeated, but it's so essential. And then you have the layer upon layer of additional problems they have. For example, if someone's in a tuberculosis trial in Africa and they come into the clinic for their intake exam, you might find out that they have 3 other problems as well, and the research project might only have funding to deal with the testing for tuberculosis or the research treatment for tuberculosis. And what do you do when you see someone with so many other problems? How do you handle that, being someone who is duty-bound to provide care? So, you know, it's this notion of respectfully listening, getting to know the whole person, and even if you can't treat those other problems, trying to figure out who can or how that person's other problems can be addressed. And it's also, I think, made PRIM&R global, and problems now are global. The world is global, as you said, and certainly research is global, so it has enabled us to keep pace with the reality of 21st century research life. I think PRIM&R has been so blessed by the people that have been associated with it, starting with the people on the board and right up there. You know, a hair's breadth second is the staff, who are extraordinary. And then our community, the community of volunteers who teach our classes and courses and at our conferences, the people who attend, the people who read our newsletter, the people who listen to the webinars, I have really come to believe that there is something unique about people that get into this kind of work or stay in this kind of work, or at least want to pursue education in this kind of work. It's a remarkable community. I just feel like there's a lot of nobility and, again, great heart and a great sense of purpose in the people working. And so because of the people, we're no longer a lonely voice in the wilderness. We are a strong voice. And that has been slow but steady. And it's really been because the organization has a mission that is basically a human rights mission. You know, our mission is to protect people. And it's an outgrowth of all the other important human rights movements, you know, civil rights and gay rights and women's rights and environmental rights and developmental disability rights and disability rights. And so we're a human rights movement at our core. I've treated this mission as a human rights mission. And so when people embrace a mission like that, it's usually not because, you know, for the board, they don't come to meetings on weekends in airless rooms because it's going to get them anywhere. They believe in it. Our staff, they don't, you know, punch clocks here. It is not just a job or just a paycheck. They believe in what we do. And the community doesn't come because they're getting credit, because very few of them are getting any kind of continuing ed. They come because they want to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and they want quality, and they want excellence, and they want to do the right thing. Everybody wants to do the right thing. Most people just don't have the tools or the support. So we're not a voice that's lonely anymore. Sometimes it still feels like the wilderness, but we're a stronger voice in the wilderness. And it's all because of grassroots, and it's all because of, you know, this notion that, you know, there is such power when people come together. And, you know, it really works. I think that inclusivity and community are simple concepts, but powerful in their simplicity. And PRIM&R has been able to, because we believe in those concepts, we've really been able to be in the right place at the right time and seize every opportunity given to us. And I think PRIM&R also has a spirit of gratitude. I mean, we never assumed that people would come to our conferences or volunteer or, you know, work as hard as our staff members and board members work. I mean, it's just been this, I'm always in awe when I see people go above and beyond, and every single cohort at PRIM&R, the board, the staff, the community, go above and beyond, and I don't ever take that for granted. And I think that people feel appreciated and feel valued, and when people feel valued, you know, the sky is the limit. And, you know, we're just a true team. Everybody that's part of this organization, I think, feels they're part of a mission, and it gives you purpose in life, and it hopefully fuels people's passion and gives them a sense of meaning. You know, I think meaningful work is really a big part of why we're here. I think the main reason we're here is to love each other and help each other, but to do something meaningful with our time here, our short time here, is another big part of it. You know, it's so cliched, but I feel like the most enduring challenge is always education, because I feel like, again, the majority of people want to do the right thing, but they don't know what that is, or they don't know how to do it. Ethical questions, as we've said, do not lend themselves to easy answers. There are no simple answers. And so I feel like when you're talking about ethical research, it's a matter of bringing people together through whatever medium, be it digital or electronic or in person to really share and to talk about how to do that. The problems don't change. I mean, you know, AIDS is unique and genetics is unique and working with people in different countries and cultures is unique, but the underlying ethical problem about how to treat someone respectfully and with dignity and to really model caring and to really care enough to make sure that you're treating this person the way you treat your mother, your father, your spouse, your child, your best friend. I mean, those are universal themes that don't change. And there are many who feel that, you know, every single person who participates in research is per se vulnerable because there is this inherent power imbalance. And so the goal is to level the playing field, and that's what education does, both of researchers and those in the research establishment, to educate them about subjects' needs and desires and how to be much more respectful, and to educate subjects so that they can be much more empowered. So it's both ends. But I also think that another enduring problem always is that of the influence of money and profit, and that will never go away. That's since time immemorial. And so another consciousness-raising challenge that will endure forever, sadly, is to make sure that money doesn't overtake the principles and the nobility or the scientific quest for new therapeutics. You know, people are driven by many different motivations. Marie Curie, who is my hero, Shiro, would not patent radium because she felt it was wrong. She said it's like patenting the sun. You can't patent the sun. If radium, she said, can help someone, why would we want to profit from it? Well, Marie Curie is rolling over in her grave because, you know, people are rushing and racing to patent this and license that and profit from this and that. And so it's a world that is driven by money or prizes or promotions or publications, and I call them the P's. The profits, prizes, promotions, publications. And I think that you really have to do whatever you can to manage those potential ethical pitfalls, because researchers may think that scientific advancement is their one and only goal, but they, you know, everyone is bound by their frame of reference. Where you stand truly does depend on where you sit. So they can't tease out the impact of their getting a promotion or they're getting a publication or they're having a company that might license this product. And it's the job of the research ethics enterprise and ethicists and subjects and their representatives and groups like PRIM&R to really make sure that those other agendas or other, in fact, motives, however subtle, don't overtake the need to treat people with the dignity and respect and humanity they deserve, that we all deserve, and that we are here to care for and protect each other. And as long as that remains front and center, things will be better. And if that goes off center, things will be worse.
When you first entered this field as a young law student, you were among a very small number of women in the field. How would you say that women's roles in research ethics have changed over the past 40 years?
You know, in medicine, I know it's widely believed that women have humanized medicine, but the first cadre of women in medicine, you know, the notion was that they felt they had to really subdue or even suppress their nurturing instincts because they would not be considered professional. You know, it was, you know, I can't be nurturing, I can't be caring, I can't be feminine, I can't be anything or else I won't be a good doctor. But that was never the case, I don't think, in bioethics. I think the women have really brought the strongest level of scholarship, but they're all wonderful, nurturing, kind people, but a lot of the men in this field are nurturing and kind as well. Again, I think it's the field itself attracts very caring, very principled people, and many of the people who were in the vanguard are people who came from the civil rights movement or the anti-war movement or the women's movement. So again, a lot of the pioneers and even now the leaders and luminaries are people who come from a human rights background, so they are uncommon in general, gender aside. Well, I'm laughing because in effect, a lot of my closest friends and mentors have had to tamp down my activist instincts, and their perhaps greatest contribution to my ability to be the leader that PRIM&R deserved was to hold me back from my otherwise perhaps too strident instincts. But every single person that I've held dear has, in her heart or his heart, been people who are very passionate about human rights. I mean, people like Paula Knudsen, Leonard Glantz, Alex Capron, on and on and on. People who really feel that this, again, is a very noble endeavor, because these are vulnerable, sick, scared, and otherwise people who don't need protection so much as need to be treated the way they deserve to be treated. And so my activism has changed from, again, sort of getting tear gassed at the Washington Monument over the Vietnam War, or getting threatened in Selma, Alabama over the civil rights movement, or, you know, having shouting matches with people over issues around choice, to trying to find a much more practical and ultimately effective way to affect change. And so my mentors and the closest friends and family members have helped me learn that help me practice what I preach is respect, so that people who disagree with me have legitimate reasons for thinking as they do, and it's not they're bad and I'm good, or they're good and I'm bad, or it's that we have different approaches, and that no one holds the moral high ground, and that to the extent that we can really understand that and try to see it from the other person's perspective, really see it, and shed our own judgments, or at least try to keep them in check, we'll all be happier and more successful. And, you know, judgment is a very odious way of approaching another person, making judgments about someone. We don't know anything about other people until we have a relationship with them. I clearly came to any job I've ever had as a feminist and as an activist. And to the extent that that meant, you know, coalition building and listening to everybody, and you know, energy and passion and, you know, just commitment and determination, I brought all of that to PRIM&R. To the extent that I, for a long time, was not a believer in hierarchies. That changed fairly quickly, because as the organization grew, it became clear that you needed hierarchy, and you needed management, and you needed to have a sense of order and rules, and those were not my strengths. I was the wild child. And so thankfully there are many people who have come along who've really been wonderful at bringing the yin to my yang and helping me make sure that this wasn't, you know, Woodstock. It was a functioning office. So I guess that what I've brought is this belief in human rights, belief in the dignity of each person, belief in education, belief in, you know, in really going above and beyond in everything you do. That I was brought up that there's no point doing anything unless you do it right, and that you really you learn from everybody every day, and there's no one you can't learn from. Taxi drivers, hotel maids, you know, servers at restaurants. I believe that. I believe that everyone has a story. And I think that if I brought some sense of taking down barriers between them and us, you know, whoever the thems are and whoever the S's are, you know, researchers and subjects, and government and funders, and you know, lawyers and ethicists, wherever there are barriers, I believe in taking them down. So maybe that's part of what I brought. I also tremendously love people, and believe in the human spirit, and believe in relationships. I feel like We only get by with a little help from our friends. Wow, I'm quoting the Beatles a lot. Anyhow, so those are some of my qualities, and they each have negative implications for running an organization as well as positive. And because I've had such extraordinary staff members, I've gotten to do the things that hopefully, you know, are more on the coalition building, people embracing, inclusion side, and then the rules and the management were left to those far more skilled than I at the parts that I know nothing about. I believe that everyone has many stories, and I believe that, again, it's very aligned with or part of this notion of not making judgments about people based on what you see or what you think or where they come from or where they went to school. And I've always been interested in hearing people's stories, partly because I think that's a sign of respect. If you listen to someone, really listen and make eye contact and try to tune out the rest of the world. But it really, to me, signals that I care about you and I want to hear about you, and I'm not afraid of your emotions, and I hope you're not afraid of mine. And I believe that if you are willing to share with me your stories, then again, barriers will be taken down and we can be more connected to each other. And in my world, connections are everything. I do believe that everyone is connected. But the only way to make those connections real is by listening to other people. But whenever you start to listen to someone, you find connections. And to me, that's the way to turn this 4 trillion person world into one by one by one. You know, everyone has a name. Everyone has a story. Everyone has the same desire. Everyone wants to be loved. Everyone wants dignity. Everyone wants their children to be safe. Everyone wants the same thing, but unless we hear their stories, we don't know that. So I feel that way about my friends, I feel that way about strangers I meet, and I really feel that way about research subjects and about anyone vulnerable. Poor people who are pregnant, soldiers, prisoners, people who have mental challenges, people who have physical challenges. You know, we're all human. We all have demons, we all have struggles, but we can really help each other just by listening and caring.
So over the past several years, you undertook to get a new project underway at PRIM&R, entitled People and Perspectives, and we're doing that today. The project seeks to record and convey the stories of many individuals who've helped shape PRIM&R's journey over these past 4 decades. Why has this project been important to you, and what do you hope the project and the collection of these individual voices will accomplish?
You know, my answer to the last question about hearing stories and taking down barriers and believing that everyone's stories are inspirational and educational, and certainly the way to make connections real is part of it. But it's also part of the fact that I think there are truly remarkable people in this field, people that really care deeply. This organization would not be what it is without this collection of extraordinary human beings, and I want to hear their stories. In 1994, my synagogue did a project in which we interviewed women in our congregation who were in their 80s and 90s, and I believe there were 1 or 2 centenarians. And I was very, very privileged to be one of the interviewers, and I interviewed 3 different women and 1 man. Actually, that was a separate person in our congregation. It wasn't part of the original Women Whose Lives Span the Century project. In any case, I had never interviewed anyone before. I had never really known about oral history except seeing it in course catalogs in college. And I fell in love with this field and fell in love with this notion of collecting people's stories, and was just awed by the relationships I developed with these people just based on these hours spent together, and how they were able to tell me things that they might not be able to tell people to whom they were much closer. There's something about talking to a stranger, a relative stranger. And I've thought often, working on my own family's genealogy, how much I would have loved to have sat down with my grandmother when she was younger. By the time I was able to ask her questions, her memory was fading. My great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother. And I just feel like having the technology to do this makes capturing people's stories just a whole new form of history. You know, people don't keep diaries anymore and don't write letters very much anymore, as you've taught me. And so capturing the stories, particularly of a field that was as nascent as this one when PRIM&R first started, I mean, in effect, these are pioneers, many of the people. And particularly because, again, it's such a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary field that there's so many different voices. You would never want to think that the researchers who, you know, are on YouTube or on TV or in the papers are the sole representative of the field, nor would you want to think the pharmaceutical people or the ethicists or just the subjects. You want to hear all the voices, and you want them to hear each other. Because that's such a rich way for them to develop the empathy and the compassion, or to strengthen the empathy and compassion. So this project has been so near and dear to me since it was first conceived, and I'm so excited about watching it continue to grow and expand, because to me it's the history of the field, it's history of PRIM&R, it's seeing the smiles on people's faces when you tell them that you'd like to interview them, or when you're in fact interviewing them. Everyone is surprised that anyone's interested in their stories, and just the simple fact of sitting down with someone with a tape recorder is a way of respecting them and honoring them. And so it's a project that embodies so many of PRIM&R's core values, as well as a way to capture its history and the fields as well. Well, I always say that I won the husband lottery. I am married to Seymour Small and have been for 34 years. And he is my soulmate, and he is my partner in every single thing I do. He is my rock. He is my mental health. And he was PRIM&R's rock and errand boy and IT designer and computer guy and banker and post office runner. I mean, in the early years when it was me and a work-study student, or me and one other half-time person, it was always, since I met Seymour, the two of us. I met him I met him 4 years after I started to work at PRIM&R. And from the very beginning, he was just, as he's always been with everything, there when needed. How can I help you? How can I make your life easier? So he went to MIT for grad school, and so the two of us would go to MIT at night and work on these terminals, and I'd type all this PRIM&R stuff, and he'd help me. And then we'd come back the next morning, and we'd pick up these big stacks of letters that I had typed from a mainframe computer. They were on white paper. Then the two of us would go to Noman Copy in Harvard Square, and he would make PRIM&R stationery for me by graphics somehow. Then we'd give the stack of stationery to the guy at Noman, and we'd give the person at Noman the stack of letters, and somehow these letters came out. And then Seymour would stand there with me at Noman, and we'd stuff them into envelopes, and we'd handwrite the addresses, because who knew how to do labels? There were no personal computers, and we weren't going to type them all on a Selectric. So Seymour is, I don't know how to say it for public consumption, but he's so just right for me. He's a partner and a supporter and a best friend and a lover and an amazing father and an amazing brother and son. He's just a very grounded, contented, kind blessing in my life. And he has done so much for PRIM&R. I mean, I just spent 4.5 days up in New Hampshire. He entertained PRIM&R's past board chair for 4.5 days, and his son, who came on a college tour. So I said, oh, don't worry, just they're going to sleep here. My husband took them on a tour of Boston. My husband, you know, took them wherever they needed to go, you know, made sure they had breakfast, you know, just, took them to a place to watch the World Cup. I mean, he's just that kind of person. He would never ever pass up an opportunity to try to help someone or do something kind. And he is the most patient, fun, smart, you know, I just feel like I am a very lucky human being because I'm married to him. And PRIM&R is lucky to have had the benefit of his 2-for-1 blue plate special help all these years. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about him as my favorite subject.
In a recent speech, you said, consider ethics not just your day job, but a way of life, a way of doing things, a way of seeing the world. Ask yourself, does this path have heart? Here's my question. Some may think that in the world of research ethics, philosophical and relatively abstract precepts are of utmost importance. Why do you feel that issues of the heart should be at the center?
I feel like abstract, theoretical, philosophical issues are just that. They are abstract and theoretical. And I feel that something can be so elegant and beautiful in writing, but you can't translate it to a relationship without using your heart. And, you know, your brain's important, I don't deny that. But to me, the people that I am drawn to in life are people who operate with both organs. And I believe that morality and ethics is something that you learn very early. You know, it's really a way of life. I believe that. I believe that people can be taught how to behave in certain circumstances. But I think that you learn very early how to treat people, how to talk to people, how to treat animals. I think that ethics is really in your bones, in your DNA, certainly in your environment. I think the heart is the universal language. I mean, I think there are many different types of intelligence, it's many different types of ways to approach people for whatever the purpose. But I think that when you really are willing to be vulnerable with someone and show them that you're human and that you recognize their humanity, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish will be easier because there's a more direct tie between the two of you. I feel like when someone is approaching someone to participate in a research project, for example, there is this power imbalance, there is this white coat, there is this institution. It all feels very daunting and intimidating to someone who's sick or poor or uninsured or vulnerable for whatever reason. But if either the white coat comes off or the figure of white coat comes off and it's eyeball to eyeball, person to person, heart to heart, two human beings without any pretenses, I think there's a better chance of embodying and modeling respect and feeling respect. So I just feel like wholehearted living, whatever the activity, is the way that that's the path I've chosen. It's not right for everyone. It definitely is more of a let it all hang out path, but it's really been a wonderful life for me because I seek connection, seek relationships, and seek ways to show people that I value them. And that's my little tiny bid to make the world a better place. And it's small, but it's very, very fulfilling. And I just feel very privileged to have had this job. I feel like it was just like my husband's the right husband for me. This was the right job for me. And I would not have stayed 39 years, believe me, unless everything about it felt right, and it did. Starting with my coworkers and the board and the issues, but truly in that order. So thank you, Jane, so much.